Right.
Hi.
All right, figured it out.
Do you have the exact link for where you opened the Hangouts on Air?
Yeah.
You would think it would be a little easier to.
Well, yeah, you would think. All right. For future reference.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So this week we're talking about various sources of power and influence from the book. And it says, work to tie those experiences to your role as a leader or as a follower. Finally, discuss ways in which cultural difference may influence the way we interact with leaders and employ power. So, some of like the power things that I related with most was probably like reward power and legitimate power. Not legitimate power, expert power. Personally, I feel like I don't have any legitimate power, to be honest, in my position at work. So I really rely on like reward power and expert power for other people to listen to what I'm saying and to follow what I tell them like needs to be done and why it needs to be done a certain way.
Yeah, I have to agree. I work for Starbucks, so I work within a corporate structure. So it can be harder to foster those other types of power. I certainly try not to use coercive power. I don't think that many corporations promote coercive power, but we do structurally lean on the kind of short-sighted reward power system. It's funny because as I've worked in this position longer, I've been able to kind of, and we've talked about this in our last meetings, kind of forge a bit of a referent power that seems to go on like a social wavelength. So even though I'm using rewards, if I've been in my position long enough, and I think we've all had a boss who's kind of been like this, like you just maybe just enjoy this person outside, like you have a personal relationship with them, you like them. You can kind of like start transitioning that way, but that also works outside the corporate structure.
Yeah, I also work for Starbucks. I mean, a lot of people do online for ASU now. But I really think they try to avoid coercive power because they don't write people up like ever. Like it's very rare for somebody to get written up or fired for being written up. It's just a very rare occurrence. Like I've actually never seen it happen. And my managers have all told me, yeah, it's pretty much impossible to get fired from Starbucks. So I think a lot of corporations do stay away from coercive power. I don't even know how to say it, but yeah.
I work for Starbucks too, and I started when I first started, it was like 10 years ago. And then I've been like on and off with them, and now I'm back with them. So for me, I think it's more like informational power. Like I have a lot of information just because I've been there for so long. It's that new partners coming in or new employees, they kind of look to the partners that have been there for a long time for just like all the questions. So I feel like they kind of look up to the more tenured partners as leaders in that way. But I think that also kind of goes off of referent power just like being they're looking again at the more tenured employees or partners to be their role model, kind of. So
See,
I would
I
kind of. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, that's fine. Please.
I actually, I work at a community college, and I find myself referring most on referent power because there are so many different departments, there are so many different people that you're working with, and if you want to get anything done, you have to build the relationships with people. And unfortunately, I do see a lot of instances with coercive power or just, legitimate power. Like people will not really have a good reason to have you do something rather than they are a higher up or they're your boss. And so there can be a lot of like interdepartmental politics, and so you really do have to build those relationships, and you do have to be a role model. And it's funny, when I first started working here, I didn't have any expert power. I didn't really have any say in anything, and so a lot of stuff wouldn't get done, and I have some really big headphone problems. A lot of stuff wouldn't get done until you do build a relationship. So it's funny when I think about how when I first started working here, I couldn't get anybody to do anything until you build those relationships. So unfortunately, I wish there would be more instances of, rewards don't really work because, everybody has kind of their own agenda. And so there's not really, the reward system can't work because if you may be working with a team, but if they work under a different leader, they want a different reward, they want the recognition. So I think building relationships and referent power is something that I have the most experience with.
I was kind of wondering about the flip side of that when I read the question, which was, if you guys ever find your hand kind of forced into using an element of power that you don't want to use. Like when I'm dealing with, I don't have any kids. So when I'm dealing with someone else's kids, I really have no method and nothing to like lean on. So I use a lot of coercive behavior. Like I just kind of feel like I don't have the experience. I certainly don't know these kids very well, and I just know the basics of like you either need to do this or not do this, and I find myself exceedingly uncomfortable. And of course, that's not just based on power. I'm just uncomfortable around kids. But like I do not find I was just wondering about like the flip side of the conversation, which is like if you really enjoy these types of models, what sticks out about other models?
I was thinking about being a parent myself too. Again, the referent power comes in, just like because my son is 3. He's almost 3. He watches me all the time. I see him or hear him repeat things that I say, whether it's good or bad, constantly. So he's always looking to me to be a role model. So that's another side of it too.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I don't have children, but my fiance has a little boy. And so he, if I try to get him to do something, I kind of use the reward leadership, and go clean your room.
Bribery.
Yeah, something. And so it's funny because we had this, this conversation the other night, my fiance and I, and he said, well, you don't have to promise him rewards, you can just tell him to do something. He's like, I don't promise him rewards to do something. So he employs a different type of leadership, or, I can't do that though, so.
Yeah, I agree. I went to Disneyland this summer with family friends with a 4 and a 5-year-old. And as you can imagine, they were a handful. And I don't really deal with kids often, so it was really weird And like I would kind of like to get them in a better mood, I'd be like, oh, if you do this, I'll buy you a churro. Like it was really easy to use like the reward power on like other people's children, but I think it's a lot different when it's your own child.
I think it's definitely situational. So, I mean, depends on the mood. But.
Yeah. And then another part that I wanted to like relate to reward power is something I've noticed about myself when I'm working. I tend to do reward power, but not in the point to where I'm like, oh, like I'll buy you lunch or something. It's more of like when we have transferred partners who come to our store and they're very they're not that great and they don't really listen sometimes, because sometimes they're just stuck in their ways and every store is different. So I just like I don't know. I guess I have this kind of very standoff personality towards them, and until they like help me and like understand like why I want them to do things a certain way, I tend to be kind of cold. But when they get better at the store and they like perform better and they actually want to perform better, I find myself like opening up and like being warm with them, you know, and just getting to know each other better. So I've found that to be kind of my personality in a weird way.
Yeah, I can see how that could be reward power.
Yeah.
See, I consider myself to be kind of like an uncomfortable leader. I mean, I haven't had, you know, too much experience in leadership positions, and so I would like to think that when I am in more of a leadership position, I think that I would probably try to focus on leading through empowerment. You know, that was one part of the chapter that I found really, you know, useful to, you know, share the power. There's less pressure if you're going to be working with the team, you know, have them, you know, feel that they have a say in it and have them be able to take the credit. And, you know, I think that it, especially when, you know, in a group situation, it goes back to the, you know, they have to have motivation. You have to have trust to get them to contribute. So that's what I think I would like to, that's the type of leader I would like to be, is lead through empowerment.
I certainly feel like I'm not the only one who saw the breakdown of empowerment within leadership, and it kind of resonated with the whole transformational leadership subject that we talked about last week, because it really just seemed like a breakdown of those elements again, which are fostering ownership, finding motivation, and it did a much better job this time around about talking about the direct benefits towards that. Like as a leader, you almost become safeguarded from failure if you give your power away more. That the natural, you know, you raise job satisfaction, you raise performance levels, you raise ownership, you raise trust, and at the same time you raise innovation by kind of reducing authoritarian practices. So that kind of reinforced and compounded all the things we've been learning chapter after chapter about the importance of building interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, it definitely made me think, like in terms of the types of power and like giving power away and using that sort of trust in people around you, like especially ecological power. I work at Starbucks, and like just giving control of the physical environment and the way that work is organized to sort of like the entire store, and having people give like a real voice in their store is sort of one of the best things you can do to just get everybody on the ground, because then we're all committed to just the way the store is running.
Right.
And it can definitely blow up in your face, but that type of trust can be really hard. And as far as like transformational leadership, just giving that sort of power away can make a big difference.
And I think that's one of the hallmarks of like being a really great leader, is that you're not afraid to share that power. And I worked with a lot of, you know, I don't want to say power hungry individuals, but people that don't want to share anything. They function on that's what they want to be known for being the most powerful. And if you're comfortable enough to share that with others, and that's I think it's very brave.
It's funny because as I read about the organizational structures that build empowerment within the chapter, it's funny that when you look back at maybe a class project that you did when you were in elementary school or middle school, they kind of made that a must. Sometimes you would have to take like a group project and one person would have this task and one person would have that task and one person would have that task. You know what I mean? So they inherently try to build role playing, and for better for worse. Maybe that wasn't the intent, but it's funny to see that that is the basic principle of high functioning, empowering organizational structures. And if you kind of follow those rules, then you are by default kind of dictating ownership. Of course, it's not based on trust. It's based on you have to do this. So maybe that kind of doesn't give you the same results. Perhaps move on to the cultural implications.
Yeah. Personally, I don't have any, I could see how cultural differences would impact how people lead. But one part that I found interesting was uncertainty avoidance. I think the U.S. is pretty, I don't want to say reckless, but I want to say they take a lot more risk than any other, than most countries. So they might have a really hard time dealing with companies like Japan and China and business deals, because in those countries they really want to be certain that things are going to work well, and they always have a very direct plan. In the US, when it comes to business, they're very they just really like to take risks.
See, I'm actually taking this semester, I'm taking an intercultural communication business class, and
I took that
a lot of
my last term, but go on, sorry.
And so this chapter is a lot of the same. And one thing that I think the question was how do different cultures affect leadership? And one thing that I found to be pretty important is, if you're I'm looking for it, I have my notes. Okay, so high power distance cultures, maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable with a boss that wants to build a relationship, maybe the referent power wouldn't be effective for them. They're, comfortable with somebody in authority who doesn't want to, get too close to them. And so I think it's important to, and especially these days with so much business being conducted internationally, that it's just, from taking the class, I'm sure you've seen some of the ridiculous instances.
Yeah, Catherine, that's exactly what I was thinking too, was the power distance. I mean, I know, how comfortable should you act around your superior, and here in the US, the power distance is really low, so, you can be really cozy and close and friendly with your supervisor or superior, but I know in a lot of other countries, if you were to act like that, it would be considered really disrespectful. So, yeah, that's a good point, Catherine. That's exactly where I was going.
A very personal anecdote, if you guys will humor me for a second. Every time I read about high context, low context cultures, I was in a relationship with someone for years from a very low context culture, or excuse me, a very high context culture. And it was a direct like the culture shock was very, very real and very present all the time, even though it was happening here in the United States. And it was just very funny. Like you had to adhere to a lot of super subtle traditions. Like I remember the first time I met her parents, I couldn't just bring flowers for her parents. Like I had to bring flowers for like every female member of the family, whether they were there or not. So I had to show up at the house with like a dozen bunches of flowers. So, you know, I mean, just meeting the parents was like and this is just the way it works. Now, mind you, that was in a very personal setting, but I have no doubt that translates into a professional setting or translates into any sort of leadership setting. So on the plus side, you know, you get the benefits of different perspectives. And, you know, to wrap that story up, like I really loved her family. They were great. On the downside, there's a lot of backtracking, second guessing, self-checking, self-monitoring when dealing between those two cultures, because you kind of really have to walk that kind of tightrope of context and be like, is what I'm doing, is the message I'm giving out what I intend, or is it going to be interpreted a different way? The stakes in this case were just me being able to date their daughter, but the stakes in a professional case could mean a whole lot of money or your job.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering about, I mean, this is something that I wrote about on the discussion board. Like with my mother-in-law, she, you know, we both were raised here in the U.S., but she is a very kind of low context. I'm sorry, I get the two mixed up. Yeah, she's a very like low context personality. She's a big talker. She talks about everything in full detail all the time. I'm kind of more high context. I'm not a talker, only during like assignments when I need to be, or, you know, whatever, but I'm usually pretty reserved. So I have to check myself when I'm with her to make sure that I'm not acting too cold. So it's funny how that can be even, it's just like personality wise, I feel like with high and low context, rather than, it doesn't have to be big cultural differences. I feel like sometimes it's just with family to family, just, I mean, how you were raised. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's really hard. I think it's really amazing that they even have like these scales and whatnot. Just because now I feel like people are so different, especially in the U.S. You have like a huge range of people, and there's no real. I feel like there's no real scale for it on how everybody is in all of those parts. But yeah.
So this is kind of a little bit different, but I actually, for our interview assignment, I interviewed my sister, and my sister does software sales, and she travels a lot internationally for business. And one of the stories she was telling me, and it goes to whether the culture is a masculine or feminine culture. And she went to a country, and they thought that she was there to pour coffee. You know, she's like one of the higher ups in her company, and she it was actually in Mexico. They were talking to some TV station, and it was all men, and she was there to, you know, consult with them, and they wouldn't talk to her. They thought that she was there to pour the coffee, and so that could be you know, and she had done research beforehand, so she knew not to necessarily get offended. Just, you know, that's the way they're not used to seeing a woman, you know, in business. And so I think that culture has a huge part in business, and how you lead and how you deal with all the different, especially like you said, in the U.S., there's no, you almost have to treat it more as like an individual. basis because there are so many different types of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the U.S. It just feels like a really big wild card. Like I kind of feel bad for any country that has to, like, oh, what are we gonna do with the U.S. today?
Any country that has to
feel
deal
really
with
bad for them because most other countries are very exact and still follow their like cultures closely. And I think the U.S. is just kind of a wild card at this point. So,
Certainly. I mean, it's funny that you bring that up. One of the factors being, environment, but there's so many. It's not cultures are not built based just on national boundaries either. There's, a dozen major geographical subcultures within the U.S. And then there's economic cultures. So someone making $100,000 in Atlanta, Georgia, is living in a much different world than someone making $100,000 in Seattle, Washington, vice versa. You know what I mean? And then someone making $25,000 in either of those cities is living in a very different world on top of that. So what defines culture and what really poses risks when dealing interculturally, and that this chapter did a great job of helping you be mindful of, is that the boundaries are not just the boundaries that you might see on a map and the ones that you kind of ingrain, mentally. I mean, I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I can tell you that going from where I live, which is a like integrated area, it's very diverse, as opposed to going to Chinatown or Little Dominican or anything like that. It's like a whole different city. It's like a whole different world. It's crazy, and it's awesome. But I certainly wouldn't want to be selling software in all those different neighborhoods.
It's like, do you remember in like middle school or in high school when they would ask you, would you consider America to be a melting pot or like a salad bowl? Did your teachers ever say that to you?
I heard the melting pot.
Yeah.
So I guess like the melting pot is like, it's like one big pot of soup and they all, but the salad bowl is each, if you look at like different cultures in America, is like each salad ingredient is like separate. And so they say that America actually isn't a melting pot because there are, like you said, within, like Chinatown, for example, it's very concentrated, like, neighborhoods, different, so, but.
Yeah. I grew up in Washington, and when I moved to Arizona and I started going to school, because I was on campus for the first 2 years, and I think it was a culture shock in itself because there was so much of every culture on the ASU campus. Like there's so many foreign exchange students. Like you have people from Saudi Arabia, China, Japan, and Dubai. And I think it was a huge culture shock because I had to get used to all of those cultures. And when I actually started working at Starbucks, the way they treat you is so different. Like every single one of them, it's so different how each like culture treats you, just as a person, and it's just really interesting to see.
Right on.
Yep. All right. Any last words?
Carrie, I know you volunteered to edit next week.
Yeah, I can do next week.
I'd like to volunteer in a future week too. I have to go right now and get fitted for a tux, so I'm unavailable tonight to do editing. But if you guys want to just start a rotation for that.
I was going to edit tonight.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if you could, Andrew, if you want to edit the week after me, so what we're doing, so you'll be doing week 4, and then I'll do week 5, and then Andrew, do you want to do week 6?
I can do the last week.
And then William. Okay, that would be great.
Cool. And Jessica, if you have any, or if anybody has any problems with it, I don't know how you're going to be editing it. Like I said, I do iMovie.
I'm probably going to try iMovie. I've never used it. So I'm going to try it, and then I'll probably just Google, or I'll like send you like a quick IM or something.
Yeah.
If I have any questions. So
I can email you my number if you want to text me too. So I think it was like $15 for iMovie. So
I already have
unless
it.
you want to find like a free one, I couldn't. I didn't
No.
want to download like a free one. So.
No, I already have it. It's all good.
Oh, you do? Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, you guys have a good week.
Good week, everybody.
Oh, do we have anything due for the proposal? The paper.
I don't think so. As far as I know, it's just due the last like week or whatever. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
Okay.
Take
All
care.
right, Jess. I'll send you a text with my number or an email with my number if you want to text for help. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
See you next
Bye,
week.
everyone.
All right.